alien princess terrified to marry ruthless human, until she saw his true heart. The crystal halls of the Volanti Palace had never felt so cold. Princess Uravel stood before the towering windows of her chamber, her luminescent skin flickering with pale blues and grays colors of fear that she could not hide. Her species wore their emotions like humans wore clothes, and right now every servant in the palace could see her terror. "Your Highness, the council's message has been confirmed," her handmaiden Solari whispered, her own glow dimming in sympathy. "The human delegation arrives tomorrow. Tomorrow." Uravel pressed her slender fingers against the cold glass. Tomorrow she would meet the creature she was expected to marry, Admiral Park Junho of the Terran Defense Fleet, the Butcher of Nexar Prime, the most feared human commander in 3 galaxies. "Tell me again what the intelligence reports say," Uravel commanded, though she had memorized every horrifying word. Solari hesitated, her 4 eyes blinking rapidly. "Your Highness, perhaps it would be better. Tell me." The handmaiden's glow turned sickly yellow with reluctance. "Admiral Park Junho, age 42 by human counting. He rose through the ranks faster than any human in their military history. He ended the Nexar War in 72 hours, a conflict that had raged for 15 years before his arrival. The death toll was..." She paused, her voice trembling. 200,000 in a single day, Your Highness. They say he showed no emotion as the reports came in. They say he simply nodded and ordered the next strike." Uravel felt her stomach twist. 200,000 lives, and the human had simply nodded. What else? "Humans are Deathworlders, Your Highness. Their planet is classified as a Category 12 hazard world massive predators. Extreme weather, toxic atmosphere, and gravitational forces that would crush most species. They evolved as persistence hunters, chasing their prey for days until the creatures collapse from exhaustion. Their bones are dense as metal, their muscles far stronger than ours, and their eyes..." Solari shuddered visibly. "Their eyes face forward, Your Highness. Like all predators." Uravel had seen images of humans before. Those forward-facing eyes had haunted her dreams, eyes designed by evolution for one purpose: to track prey. And now one of these predators was coming to claim her as his bride. "Why?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "Why must it be me?" "The Crixian raiders grow bolder every season," another voice answered. Uravel turned to find her mother, Queen Thelavan, gliding into the chamber. The Queen's glow was steady purple, the color of grim determination. "Our fleet is depleted. Our warriors are few. The humans possess the most powerful military force the galaxy has ever known, and they have agreed to protect our borders. In exchange for me. In exchange for an alliance sealed by marriage," the Queen corrected gently. "The Galactic Council believes this union will benefit both species. Humanity gains legitimacy among the elder races, and we gain their protection." "And what do I gain, Mother?" Uravel demanded, her glow flashing angry red. "A husband who slaughters thousands without feeling. A monster in my bed?" Queen Thelavan approached her daughter and cupped her face with cool, gentle hands. "You gain the survival of our people, my child. Is that not worth any sacrifice?" Uravel wanted to scream that it was not worth this. She was an empath. Her species could feel the emotions of others as clearly as spoken words. The thought of lying beside a creature filled with bloodlust and violence made her soul recoil. What would it feel like to touch a mind that had ordered the deaths of 200,000 beings? Would his cruelty poison her? Would his darkness drown her light? But she was a princess. She had been raised to serve her people above herself. "I will do my duty," she said finally, her glow fading to resigned gray. "But I will not pretend to be happy about it." The next morning came too quickly. Uravel stood in the grand reception hall alongside her mother and the assembled nobles of the Volanti court. The crystalline walls reflected thousands of nervous lights as her People's collective anxiety colored the air with sickly yellows and pale greens. Then the doors opened. Human soldiers marched in, first tall, broad creatures encased in dark armor that made them look like living shadows. Their boots struck the floor in perfect unison, each step echoing through the hall like a war drum. Uravel felt the nobles around her shrink back, their glows flickering with primal fear. And then she saw him. Admiral Park Junho walked at the center of his guards, and he was nothing like she had expected, yet somehow more terrifying for it. He was not the hulking brute of her nightmares. He was lean, composed, with black hair streaked with gray at the temples and a face that seemed carved from stone. He wore a simple dark uniform decorated with metal she did not recognize, and he moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had no need to prove his danger. But his eyes, those predator eyes, were what stopped her breath. They were dark brown, almost black, and they held no warmth at all. When his gaze swept across the assembled court, Uravel felt as though a winter wind had passed through her soul. There was no cruelty in those eyes, but there was no kindness either. There was simply nothing, an emptiness as cold and vast as the void between stars. She reached out with her empathic senses, desperate to understand what lay beneath that frozen exterior. And she found a wall. His mind was blocked completely, utterly sealed. She could feel nothing from him at all, as if he were made of stone rather than flesh. In all her years, she had never encountered a being she could not read. The silence where his emotions should have been terrified her more than any rage or hatred ever could. What kind of creature could hide its own soul? The admiral stopped before the throne and bowed, a precise military gesture. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, empty of any feeling. Queen Thelevin, I am honored by your welcome. I look forward to a productive alliance between our peoples. Productive. He spoke of their marriage as though it were a business transaction. Uravel watched him rise, and their eyes met for the first time. She searched his face for any hint of emotion, any crack in that terrible mask. But he simply nodded once, acknowledging her existence as though she were another item on his agenda, and turned his attention back to her mother. Her glow flickered to pale, terrified white. She was going to marry a monster who felt nothing at all. She was going to marry a monster who's going to marry a monster who felt nothing at all. Alien princess terrified to marry ruthless human until she saw his true heart. The days that followed were an exercise in elegant torture. Uravel found herself constantly in the admiral's presence, diplomatic meetings, formal dinners, carefully orchestrated walks through the palace gardens, and each encounter left her more confused and frightened than the last. Admiral Park Junho remained exactly what he had been in that first moment, a wall of ice, impossible to read and equally impossible to understand. He spoke when spoken to. He answered questions with minimal words. He ate little, smiled never, and watched everything with those cold predator eyes. The nobles whispered that he was exactly what the rumors claimed, a killing machine dressed in human skin. And yet, small things began to trouble Uravel's certainty. During a formal dinner, she watched him bow deeply to a servant who spilled wine near his sleeve, the same servant who had trembled in terror, expecting punishment. The admiral had simply said, "No harm was done," and returned to his meal as though nothing had happened. When offered the most luxurious guest quarters in the palace chambers decorated with priceless crystals and staffed by 20 servants, he had politely declined and requested a small room near the barracks where his soldiers were housed. "I prefer to stay close to my people," he had explained, and there had been something almost soft in his voice. Though it vanished so quickly, Uravel was certain she had imagined it. His soldiers confused her most of all. She had expected them to fear their commander the way prey feared a predator, but instead they looked at him with something that resembled devotion. She had witnessed a young lieutenant approach the admiral with a personal problem, something about family troubles back on Earth, and the terrifying butcher of Nexer. Prime had listened patiently for nearly an hour. He had offered quiet advice and promised to arrange extended leave for the young man. None of this fit the monster she had been promised. The breaking point came during a diplomatic reception on the 5th day. The Grand Hall was filled with representatives from a dozen worlds, all gathered to witness the formal engagement announcement. Uravel stood beside the Admiral, her glow carefully controlled to show calm confidence, even as her heart raced with fear. And then Lord Vethran spoke. He was an elderly Volanti noble, known for his sharp tongue and sharper prejudices. He had opposed the human alliance from the beginning, and apparently the wine had loosened what little restraint he possessed. "How fortunate we are," he declared loudly, his voice carrying across the hall, "to welcome the mighty humans to our humble world. Tell me, Admiral, do your people still eat their meat raw, or have you mastered fire by now?" The hall went silent. Uravel felt her glow flicker with horror. Around her, nobles held their breath, waiting for the human to explode into the violence they all expected. Admiral Park Junho turned slowly to face the old noble. His expression did not change. Those empty eyes did not flicker with anger or offense. He simply regarded Lord Vethran the way one might regard a mildly interesting insect. "We have indeed mastered fire, Lord Vethran," he said calmly, "though I confess we still struggle with mastering good manners. Perhaps you might give us lessons?" A ripple of shocked laughter passed through the crowd. Lord Vethran's glow turned furious crimson, but before he could respond, the Admiral had already turned away, smoothly redirecting the conversation to trade negotiations with a nearby ambassador. Uravel stared at him in disbelief. Any Volanti noble would have demanded satisfaction for such an insult. Any of the warrior races would have challenged Lord Vethran to combat. But the human had simply deflected the attack with a word and moved on, as though the old fool's hatred was beneath his notice. Later that evening, she found herself following him. She did not know why. Perhaps curiosity had finally overwhelmed her fear, or perhaps she simply needed to understand the contradiction that was Admiral Park Junho. She trailed him through the quiet corridors of the palace, keeping her glow dim to avoid detection, until she saw him step onto a private balcony overlooking the night gardens. He was speaking to his aide, a stocky human woman with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes. "You should have put that old bigot in his place," the woman said, her tone familiar and comfortable. "One word from you, and the council would have had him removed from court." "And accomplish what, Colonel Chun?" The Admiral replied. "He is afraid. His world is changing, and he does not understand the change. Fear makes people cruel, and cruelty answered with cruelty only breeds more fear." "You're too soft," Chun said, but there was affection in her voice. "Perhaps, but I will not add to the fear that already fills this place. Did you see how they looked at us? How the princess looked at me?" A pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "They expect the monster. They have already decided what I am. Nothing I say will change their minds, only what I do." Uravel pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. She had never heard him speak so many words at once, and there was something in his tone that she had not expected, weariness, perhaps, or loneliness. "The princess seems clever," Chun observed. "Give her time. She might surprise you. She is an empath. She must feel nothing from me but silence, and that silence must terrify her." The Admiral sighed, a sound so human and tired that Uravel felt her prejudices crack. "I do not know how to reach her without causing more harm. Everything I am, everything I have done, stands between us like a wall. Maybe start by actually talking to her?" "Just a thought." A soft sound escaped the Admiral, almost a laugh. Wise as always, Colonel. What would I do without you? Starve to death, probably. You forgot to eat again today. Uravel retreated silently, her mind spinning. He was worried about hurting her. He was concerned that his silence frightened her. The monster she had feared was afraid of causing her pain? She did not sleep that night. The next evening, she went to the gardens. She told herself she needed fresh air, but she knew the truth. She was looking for him. She was looking for answers. The palace gardens at night were a maze of bioluminescent flowers and softly glowing trees. She wandered the winding paths until she heard something unexpected, a voice, speaking softly in a language she did not recognize. She followed the sound to a small clearing near the garden's edge. And there he was, Admiral Park Junho, the butcher of Nexu Prime, the most feared human in 3 galaxies, was sitting on the grass with his uniform jacket removed. In his hands was a small container of food scraps, and gathered around him were a dozen of the tiny garden creatures that lived among the flowers, fluffy, timid things that fled from any loud noise. He was feeding them, and speaking to them in that strange musical language, his voice so gentle that Uravel barely recognized it. One of the creatures climbed into his lap, and the terrible admiral smiled, actually smiled, as he stroked its soft fur with one careful finger. Uravel stepped forward without thinking, and a branch cracked beneath her foot. The creature scattered. The admiral's head snapped up, his eyes finding her instantly, those predator eyes that tracked movement with terrifying precision. But then his expression softened into something that might have been embarrassment. "Princess," he said quietly, "I apologize. I did not mean to intrude upon your gardens." She stared at him, at the food scraps in his hands, at the gentle smile that still lingered at the corners of his mouth. "You were feeding them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They were hungry," he replied simply, as though that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Alien princess terrified to marry ruthless human, until she saw his true heart. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The garden was quiet save for the soft hum of bioluminescent flowers and the distant sounds of the palace. Uravel stood at the edge of the clearing, her glow flickering between confusion and curiosity, while Admiral Park Junho remained seated on the grass with food scraps still clutched in his hands. "May I join you?" she heard herself ask. If her request surprised him, he did not show it. He simply nodded and gestured to the soft grass beside him. She approached slowly, as though he were the timid creature rather than the dangerous predator, and settled herself at a careful distance. They sat in silence for several heartbeats. Then, to her amazement, the tiny garden creatures began to emerge from their hiding places. They crept forward on delicate paws, their large eyes fixed on the admiral, and one by one they returned to claim the food he offered. "They trust you," Uravel said, wonder coloring her voice. "Animals are honest. They do not care about reputations or rumors. They only know how they are treated." He held out a morsel, and a particularly brave creature climbed onto his palm to claim it. "Your palace is beautiful, but it is also full of fear. These little ones live in fear every day, fear of being stepped on, fear of being forgotten. They deserve a few moments of peace." "And you speak to them in your human language?" "Korean. It was my grandmother's language. She taught me that every creature deserves to be spoken to with kindness." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, a softening that made him look almost vulnerable. "I apologize, Princess. I know that my silence has frightened you." Uravel's glow flickered with surprise. "How did you know?" "Your light changes color with your emotions. When you look at me, it turns pale. The same color it was when you first saw me in the throne room." He set down the food container and turned to face her fully. "I should have explained sooner, but I was not certain how to begin." "Explained what?" "Why you cannot feel my emotions." She stared at him. Of all the things she had expected him to say, this was not among them. I studied your people before I came here, he continued, his voice quiet and measured. I learned that Volanthi empaths can sense the emotional states of others, that you feel what others feel, as clearly as spoken words. And I learned that human emotions are intense. We feel everything strongly: joy, anger, grief, love, and we have no ability to moderate what we project. Understanding began to dawn in her mind. You blocked yourself deliberately? I built the wall you feel. It took me 3 months of training with Volanthi diplomats on Earth. They taught me to shield my mind so that I would not overwhelm you with the chaos of human feeling. He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw something behind that careful mask, something almost like concern. I did not want to hurt you before we even had a chance to speak. Yeravel felt her world tilt. All this time, she had interpreted his silence as emptiness, as proof that he was a soulless monster. But he had not been hiding his cruelty. He had been protecting her from the very intensity of his heart. I thought you felt nothing, she whispered. I thought the rumors were true, that you were a creature without emotion. The rumors! He laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. The rumors say I am the butcher of Nexer Prime. They say I killed 200,000 beings without feeling a thing. His hands curled into fists against his knees. Would you like to know the truth of Nexer Prime, Princess? Would you like to know what kind of man you have been promised to? She should have said no. She should have fled back to the safety of the palace and held tight to her comfortable fears. But the look in his eyes, the raw pain that cracked through his careful wall, would not let her. Tell me, she said. He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with remembered anguish. The Nexer War had lasted 15 years when I arrived. 15 years of slaughter with no end in sight. The enemy had captured 6 major population centers and turned every civilian into a living shield. They knew we could not attack without killing innocents, so they hid behind the innocent and laughed at our helplessness. He stared at his hands as though he could still see blood on them. I was given a choice. I could continue the war as it had been fought, endless stalemate, thousands dying every month while the enemy grew stronger. Or I could end it quickly, with one massive coordinated strike that would destroy their command structure and break their ability to fight. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. The second option would kill 200,000 civilians. The first option would kill millions over the next decade. Yeravel felt her breath catch. You chose the lesser horror. I chose. The word came out like a wound. I chose who would live and who would die. I chose to become a butcher because the mathematics of suffering demanded it. He finally looked at her, and she saw tears glistening in those predator eyes. I saved millions of lives that day. I ended a war that would have consumed an entire sector, and I destroyed my own soul in the process. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand. The moment she did, she felt his wall crack and a wave of emotion crashed over her like a tsunami. Grief, crushing, overwhelming grief for every life he had been unable to save. Guilt that burned like acid, eating at his heart with every breath. And beneath it all, a fierce, desperate love for the universe and everyone in it. A love so intense that it had driven him to bear the unbearable, to become a monster in the eyes of the galaxy so that others would not have to suffer. She gasped and pulled her hand back. The wall slammed shut again, and she was left trembling with the aftershock of what she had felt. I apologize, he said quickly. I did not mean to. They call you the butcher, she interrupted, her voice shaking. But you carry those deaths like wounds. You remember every single one. Every name. Every face. Every child who will never grow up because of my choice. He turned away, and she saw his shoulders tremble. I tell myself that I saved more than I killed. I tell myself that there was no other way. But the telling does not make the nightmares stop. Uravel stared at the man before her, this supposed monster who wept for strangers, who fed garden creatures and spoke to them gently, who had built a wall around his own heart not to hide cruelty, but to protect others from the overwhelming force of his compassion. "You are not what I expected," she said finally. "I rarely am." He composed himself with visible effort and turned back to face her. "I understand if this changes nothing. I understand if you still see me as a monster. But I wanted you to know the truth before you were bound to me forever." In the distance, an alarm began to wail sharp and urgent, shattering the peace of the night garden. The Admiral was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor transforming in a heartbeat. The gentle man who had fed tiny creatures and wept for the dead vanished. In his place stood the commander whose name made enemies tremble. "Crixian raiders," he said, his voice cold as steel. "They have breached the outer territories." He looked down at her, and she saw the wall slam fully into place, protecting her from the intensity of what he was about to become. "Stay in the palace, princess. I will keep you safe." And then he was gone, striding toward the war that had followed him even here. Uravel watched him go, and for the first time she understood what that coldness truly was. Not cruelty, not emptiness, control. The terrible, necessary control of a man who felt too much. Alien princess terrified to marry, ruthless, human, until she saw his true heart. The days before the wedding ceremony passed like a dream. Uravel found herself seeking out the Admiral at every opportunity, not out of duty or political necessity, but because she genuinely wanted to be near him. They walked together in the gardens where he still fed the tiny creatures each night. They sat together during diplomatic meetings, and she noticed how he always ensured her comfort before his own. They talked for hours about everything and nothing: his childhood in Korea, her studies in empathic arts, the worlds they had seen, and the dreams they still carried. And slowly, carefully, he began to lower his wall. Not all at once. That would have overwhelmed her. But piece by piece, he let her feel the truth of his heart, the depth of his compassion, the weight of his responsibilities, the quiet joy he found in simple kindness. She learned that he had once wanted to be a teacher before war claimed him. She learned that he wrote poetry in Korean when he could not sleep. She learned that he had adopted 3 war orphans on different worlds and sent them money every month to ensure their education. The monster of her nightmares had become the kindest man she had ever known. On the morning of the wedding, she stood before her mirror and examined her reflection. Her glow had not flickered with fear in weeks. Instead, it shone with soft pinks and warm gold colors of happiness, colors of hope. "You look beautiful, Your Highness," Silari said, her own glow bright with joy for her princess. "Are you ready?" "I am." And for the first time since the alliance had been announced, she meant it. The wedding ceremony was held in the Grand Crystal Cathedral at the heart of the capital city. Representatives from 100 worlds filled the vast chamber, their eyes fixed on the raised platform where the union would be blessed. Holographic cameras broadcast the event across the galaxy, billions of beings watching as the terrifying human commander claimed his alien bride. Uravel walked the long aisle alone, her luminescent gown trailing behind her like captured starlight. The weight of countless stares pressed down upon her, but she did not falter. Her eyes were fixed on the figure waiting at the altar. Admiral Park Junho stood in his formal dress uniform, every metal gleaming, every line perfect. But his eyes, those predator eyes that had once filled her with terror, now held only warmth. As she approached, she saw his mask slip, and a gentle smile curved his lips. "You are radiant," he whispered as she took her place beside him. "And you are not nearly as frightening as the rumors claim," she whispered back. Something that might have been laughter flickered in his eyes. The ceremony proceeded according to ancient Volanthi tradition. Vows were spoken, blessings were given, and sacred crystals were exchanged to symbolize the joining of two lives. Through it all, Uravel felt the galaxy holding its breath, waiting to see what the union of predator and prey would truly mean. When the moment came to seal the bond, the High Priestess turned to Uravel with solemn eyes. "Princess Uravel of the Volanthi Dominion, do you accept this man as your bonded partner? Do you open your heart to his and pledge to stand beside him through all the trials that await?" Uravel turned to face her husband-to-be. She reached out and took his hands in hers, and then she did something that made the entire chamber gasp. She lowered every empathic barrier she possessed. Not partially, as she had done in the garden. Not carefully, as she had done in the days since. She opened herself completely, laying her soul bare before him, showing him everything she felt: her initial terror, her growing respect, her amazement at his kindness, and the new emotion that had blossomed in her heart without her permission. He staggered under the weight of it. His wall shattered, and for one brilliant moment, their souls touched without any barrier between them. She felt him, all of him, the grief and guilt he carried like chains, the fierce protective love that drove him forward, the loneliness of a man who had convinced himself he was unworthy of affection. And there, buried beneath years of self-denial, a fragile seed of hope that perhaps, this strange and wonderful princess might actually see him for who he truly was. And he felt her courage in facing her fears, her compassion for a man the galaxy called a monster, a growing certainty that she had found something precious hidden beneath the mask of ice. Tears streamed down the Admiral's face. The Butcher of Nexer Prime, the most feared human in 3 galaxies, stood before billions of witnesses and wept. "I accept him," Uravel said, her voice ringing clear through the cathedral. "I accept all of him, his strength and his gentleness, his shadows and his light. I open my heart to his and pledge to stand beside him, not because duty demands it, but because I choose him." The High Priestess turned to the Admiral. "Admiral Park Junho of Earth, do you accept this woman as your bonded partner? Do you open your heart to hers and pledge to stand beside her through all the trials that await?" He was silent for a long moment, overcome by emotions he had spent decades trying to suppress. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with feeling. "I came to this world expecting nothing. I came prepared to be a monster in the eyes of my bride, to serve as a political tool, to spend my life protecting people who would never see me as anything more than a weapon." He raised her hands to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "But you looked past the rumors. You saw behind the mask. You found the man beneath the monster and chose him anyway." His voice broke, and he had to pause to compose himself. "I accept her. I accept all of her, her light and her courage, her wisdom and her compassion. I open my heart to hers and pledge to stand beside her, not because alliance demands it, but because she has given me something I never dared hope for." "And what is that?" the High Priestess asked. The Admiral smiled, a real smile, unguarded and full of wonder. "A reason to believe that I am more than my darkest day." The chamber erupted in applause, not the polite acknowledgement of political necessity, but genuine celebration. Even the skeptics among the assembled dignitaries could not deny what they had witnessed. Not a union of convenience, but a true joining of hearts. Later, when the festivities had faded and the cameras had finally retreated, Uravel stood with her husband on the balcony of their shared chambers. The stars spread out before them like scattered diamonds, and somewhere among those distant lights, 2 very different peoples were learning to see each other in a new way. "The galaxy is watching us," she said softly. "They want to know what this alliance will mean." "Then we will show them," he replied, his arm warm around her shoulders. "We will show them that strength and gentleness are not enemies. We will show them that even those the universe calls monsters can learn to love." She turned to face him, her glow shining with soft, warm light. "They will tell stories about us, you know? The terrifying human and the fragile princess who found each other against all odds. Let them tell whatever stories they wish." He cupped her face in his hands, as she felt the full force of his love pouring through the bond between them. Overwhelming, intense, and utterly beautiful. "We know the truth." "And what truth is that?" He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of intimacy she had taught him from her own culture. "That you saw my true heart and chose to love it. That is the only truth that matters." She kissed him then, her husband, her partner, her unexpected gift from a universe she had thought cruel. And as their bond deepened and their hearts aligned, she understood at last what the galaxy would eventually learn. Humans were not monsters. They were beings who felt so intensely that they had learned to build walls around their hearts. They were protectors who would sacrifice everything for those they loved. They were warriors who wept for their enemies and showed mercy even in victory. They called him ruthless. They were wrong. He was relentless, relentless in compassion, relentless in protection, relentless in love. And she would spend her life showing the galaxy the difference. Alien princess terrified to marry ruthless human. Until she saw his true heart, the command center erupted into chaos the moment Admiral Park Junho arrived. Officers scrambled to their stations. Holographic displays flickered to life with tactical data, and the steady hum of military machinery filled the air with electric tension. Uravel had followed against all protocol, slipping through the palace corridors until she reached the observation gallery above the command floor. She told herself she needed to understand. She told herself she had a duty to witness how this human would protect her people. But the truth was simpler. She could not look away from him. "Report," the Admiral commanded, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. 12 Crixian warships breached the outer defense perimeter 40 minutes ago, sir. Colonel Chun responded, her fingers dancing across tactical controls. They bypassed our sensor grid, using some kind of cloaking technology we have not seen before. 4 Volanti border stations have already fallen. Casualties? Unknown, but we are receiving distress signals from civilian transports in the combat zone. At least 6 refugee ships are trapped behind enemy lines. Uravel watched the Admiral's face. It did not change. That terrible mask remained firmly in place. But she saw his hands tighten on the console before him. She knew what that meant now. Behind that wall, he was feeling everything. The fear of the trapped civilians, the urgency of every passing second, the weight of lives depending on his decisions. "Show me the tactical layout." The holographic display expanded to fill the room. 12 red markers indicated Crixian warships, arranged in a classic hunting formation designed to trap prey and prevent escape. Scattered among them were smaller blue markers, the civilian ships, desperately trying to flee towards safety. And there, at the center of the chaos, was a single marker blinking urgent yellow, a large refugee transport carrying over 1,000 Volanti civilians. "The main transport is cut off," Chun reported grimly. "The Crixians have positioned 3 ships to intercept any rescue attempt. Our fleet can engage and drive them back, but it will take time those civilians do not have." One of the human officers stepped forward, a stern-faced man with captain's insignia. "Admiral, if we commit to a full fleet engagement, we can destroy the Crixian force within 6 hours. The civilian losses would be unfortunate, but unacceptable." The single word silenced the room. Uravel saw officers freeze mid-motion, their eyes fixed on their commander. "We did not come here to calculate acceptable losses," the Admiral continued, his voice quiet but unyielding. "We came here to protect. Every life on those ships is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's beloved. I will not trade any of them for tactical convenience. Sir, with respect, the mathematics. I have heard enough about mathematics. The Admiral's mask cracked for just an instant, and Uravel glimpsed the fire beneath, the fierce, burning intensity of a man who would not accept the unacceptable. Colonel Chan, divert the main fleet to create a corridor for civilian evacuation. I want every refugee ship out of that combat zone within 2 hours. That will leave a gap in our defensive line, sir. The Crixians could... I know what they could do. Which is why I will be leading a strike team to recover the main transport personally. A murmur rippled through the command center. Colonel Chun's face went pale. Sir, you cannot be serious. Those are 3 Crixian heavy cruisers, and I have faced worse. The Admiral was already moving, issuing rapid orders as he strode toward the exit. Lieutenant Yu, prep a rapid insertion team volunteers only. Colonel Chan, you have command of the fleet engagement. Keep our people safe. Uravel watched him go, and something shifted in her heart. This was not the behavior of a monster who calculated lives like numbers on a page. This was a man who would throw himself into danger rather than accept the death of innocence. She found herself running through corridors, down stairways, until she reached the communication hub that linked to the military channels. She should not have been there. She should have stayed safe in the palace as he had asked. But she could not simply wait and wonder. She patched into the tactical frequency just as the Admiral's strike team launched. Insertion team away, came the pilot's voice. ETA to refugee transport, 17 minutes. 17 minutes. Uravel gripped the console, her glow flickering wildly. 17 minutes through a combat zone filled with enemy warships, with nothing but a small shuttle and a handful of soldiers. The communication channel crackled with status reports. She heard the main fleet engaging the Crixian forces, heard the desperate calls from civilian ships as they raced toward the evacuation corridor, heard the calm voices of human officers coordinating 100 moving pieces in a deadly dance. And then she heard his voice. Strike team to command. We have visual on the refugee transport. Heavy damage to their engines. They are dead in space. 3 Crixian cruisers are circling like sharks. Admiral, we can provide covering fire in 8 minutes. Negative. Those civilians cannot wait 8 minutes. We are going in. Uravel closed her eyes and reached out with her empathic senses, stretching farther than she had ever stretched before, pushing through the vast distance between them. She should not have been able to feel anything at such range. But the Admiral's wall had cracked during their conversation in the garden, and through that tiny gap, she caught fragments of his emotional state. Not fear, not rage, not bloodlust. Protection. A fierce, overwhelming drive to shield the innocent, to stand between the helpless and the darkness, to give everything he had so that others might live. It blazed through him like a sun, burning away every other emotion, focusing his entire being on a single purpose: save them. Enemy cruiser engaging. Taking fire. Return fire. Target their weapon systems, disable only. I want prisoners, not corpses. Even now, even in battle, even with his own life at risk, he was trying to minimize casualties. Not because he was weak, but because every life mattered to him. The minutes that followed were the longest of Uravel's life. She listened as the small strike team danced through enemy fire, as they docked with the crippled transport, as they fought room by room to secure the vessel. She heard the Admiral's voice barking orders, heard the screams of combat, heard the roar of weapons and the crash of bulkheads. And then, finally, blessed silence. Strike team to command. Transport secured. Beginning evacuation of civilians. We have over 1,000 survivors. Repeat, over 1,000 survivors safe and accounted for. Cheers erupted through the communication channels. Uravel sagged against the console, her glow shifting to brilliant gold relief. But she was not finished watching. 2 hours later, when the Crixian raiders had been driven back and the last civilian ship had reached safety, Uravel went to the medical bay. The Admiral would be there. She knew, checking on the wounded, ensuring his people were cared for. She found him sitting beside a young human soldier whose arm was bound in regenerative bandages. The Admiral was speaking quietly, and the soldier was nodding, a tired smile on his face. When the Admiral rose to move to the next bed, the soldier reached out and gripped his hand. "Thank you, sir, for not leaving us behind." "We never leave anyone behind," the Admiral replied. "Rest now. You earned it." He moved through the medical bay like that, bed by bed, soldier by soldier, human and Volanthi alike. He spoke to each one, learned their names, thanked them for their courage. By the time he reached the exit, Uravel had counted 47 individual conversations. And there, near the entrance, she saw the final proof of his true heart. A young Volanthi girl, perhaps 7 years old, sat on a bench, separated from her parents in the chaos, crying with fear and exhaustion. The terrifying human commander knelt before her, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small candy wrapped in colorful paper. "Hello, little one," he said, his voice gentle as a summer breeze. "My name is Junho. Are you hungry?" The girl looked at him with wide, tearful eyes, then reached out and took the candy. As she unwrapped it, her crying slowly stopped. The Admiral stayed with her, speaking softly, until her parents came running to collect her. He never even noticed Uravel watching. She approached him as he finally left the medical bay. His uniform was scorched and torn. His face was smudged with smoke, and exhaustion lined every feature. But when he saw her, he straightened immediately. "Princess, I told you to stay in the palace. It was not safe. Why did you agree to this marriage?" The question stopped him cold. He blinked at her, clearly thrown by the sudden change in subject. "I need to know," she pressed. "You could have negotiated a different alliance. You did not need to bind yourself to a woman who feared you, a species that called you a monster. Why did you agree?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the wall around his heart began to lower, just a crack, just enough for her to feel the truth behind his words. "Because your people needed protection," he said quietly, "and mine needed purpose beyond war. I hoped we could build something better than fear." She stared at him, this exhausted, wounded man who had risked everything to save strangers. "And what did you expect from me?" His smile was sad and soft. "Nothing, princess. I expected nothing at all. I am a monster in the eyes of the galaxy. I did not dare hope that you could ever see me as anything else." Uravel felt her heart crack open.